Welcome to Measurably Better Learning, the podcast built for learning and development professionals. Whether you're an instructional designer, L&D professional, or corporate leader, get ready for insights and ideas that will transform your approach to learning, training, and development. So let's dive in. Welcome to this episode of the Measurably Better Learning podcast. My name is Jerry Zastra, and I am with my partner in crime, Miriam Taylor. We have been, we've been working together a long time, and I've really enjoyed just all the things that you think and listening to you. And this is one of my favorite times because I get to ask you questions. So we are in the middle of a series on learning science, or the sciences of learning, and we've already talked about cognition and sort of an overview of how they fit together, but today we're going to talk about sociology. And so I want to start, Miriam, if you would just sort of recapture where we are in the conversation.
Sure. So, it's a summary statement, right? But learning science is made up of a variety of disciplines that all contribute to helping us understand how people learn and develop. And for our purposes, we're talking about cognition, psychology, sociology today specifically, linguistics, consumer science, and behavioral sciences. I think, like, as an instructional designer by practice, I'm not an expert in any of those. So I sort of think of them almost like, I always have them in the back of my head. If I know I need
foundational principles.
Yeah, if I need to dig into one, it's like something I can pull off the shelf, to reference more. But by and large, they help frame my thinking.
And you're thinking particularly about how human beings learn.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And
exactly.
So, well, let's talk a little the definition of sociology. What do we mean by that? And then how does it inform the learning experiences that we're building?
Yeah. I think at first blush, I kind of wondered that myself. It seemed like such a broad topic we've thrown out before, like anthropology. But then once I really start to think about it, sociology really helps us understand kind of those complex factors that influence how people learn and grow. Like, how does their society shape how they learn and grow? So how do you interact with people in your cultures? How do you interact with people? And I don't mean just sort of your typical demographic cultures. I mean, it's definitely how's your family life put together? What's your peers?
Sure.
What's your corporate or business life? That's all really sociology, how it all fits together. It can be big. It can be a whole country culture, or it can be small. What is the culture of your department in your manufacturing plant?
Which often are different shifts, right? Shift to shift can have. Somebody changes shifts and says, oh man, I hate, you're doing the exact same job. I hate this. I don't like being in this culture. It's different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how does that shape our thinking as instructional designers? How does sociology inform us?
Like, let's start with something sort of basic and then go a little more detailed. But really, in general, as an instructional designer, I'm trying to make sure that my learning experience represents this diverse and rich cultural perspective. And again, those aren't just words I'm throwing out, right? It does depend on the situation. We've talked a lot about learning personas, and so I need to know who my audience is. But in general, I'm always that simplified version. Does this learning experience really represent the audience I'm talking to and other really relevant, diverse audiences that they need to know about as they're going through this?
Yeah. And now you're really not looking at an individual like you might in psychology or cognition.
Right.
You're looking at individuals in a group, right? That's the basic concept of how do we behave? How do we think? How do we act? How are we motivated? Or unmotivated because of the sociological setting in which we find ourselves.
Yeah, and I think if you broaden that, so now we're thinking about, my learners, like, what is equality or inequality look like in education? So, obviously that's like their education system they went through, but they bring that with them to the workforce.
Yeah.
What is like social class, race, gender? I was just on a call with a woman from South Africa and talking about how their learner personas are so very different because, they had apartheid, and with the abolition they're still dealing with all the after effects of that. And so they might have people in the same class. These are like skills, competency-based trainings, some of whom have had the highest level, most elite educations, and some of whom had very, very basic. They're all capable of learning what's being taught, but they come from a completely different sociological framework.
And that's, you were telling me about that, and that even thinking through how they think of themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And in relation to other people. Nations that have had a strong caste system, formal or informal, nations that at some point were under an authoritarian control outside of their country. It's all of those things. You've built generationally a thing to be deferential. Right, you've built a sociology to defer to an expert, to defer to a particular race or gender or whatever. Those are powerful things in learning.
And I think the danger is that, it's one thing if you're a learning and development professional coming out of that system that you recognize, maybe you're in country, whatever. But we have such a globally diverse world. We often, as learning and development professionals, sit 4 continents away or whatever, and we have no framework for understanding that. And that's where I think just keeping some of those sociological aspects top of mind are really helpful to making sure we design a better learning experience.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's take our break, and then we're going to come back and get extremely practical. It's time for extreme practicality, pragmatism.
I could do that. Okay.
All right.
Imagine a world where every training session, every learning module, and every translated document is aligned with your company's unique goals and global ambitions. Welcome to Ingenuity, where we don't just talk about elevating your corporate learning, we make it happen. At Ingenuity, we understand the heart of your business is its people. That's why we specialize in creating custom learning solutions and translation services that are not just effective, but are designed specifically for your business's global needs. Let us show you how learning cannot be just better, but measurably better, with solutions tailored just for you. Learn more in the description below.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Miriam, you promised before the break to change my life, change how I think and live and work. And this pragmatism thing. Let's get practical and talk about the application of the science of sociology into the kinds of learning experiences that we're going to build.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of examples, but I think we touched on this kind of in a broad sense. But when I'm designing a learning experience, for example, let's say it's just e-learning to be simple at this point. But I mean, we're all trained and we do our best and focus on sort of a diversity or a richness of imagery. But we often just stop there as opposed to looking at the words that we're writing. Like, are the examples appropriate? And not even just, again, the other example is that we don't use idioms, right? Like, we're not, but that's again, barely scratching the surface.
That's 101.
Exactly. Am I actively, we've talked about this, actively seeking out in-country experts that can give me, does this example make sense? Would there be something that's more powerful here? In case studies, again, similar thing. Am I just inserting case study I'm most familiar with? Is that going to make any sense or resonate at all with the group that I'm dealing with? And if we broaden that to now, let's talk about maybe we're doing like virtual in-person training, or now we're trying to consider, do these groups I'm working with, like, are they more collaborative in nature or they prefer to be more individualistic? And it kind of goes from there. But those are things I need to think about as I'm designing learning.
Yeah. We have a client right now that works in several continents. And in one sociological setting, it is absolutely mandatory that everybody in the background, whatever's depicted, there's a great deal of diversity.
Yeah.
In the other environment in which they find themselves, diversity, good or whatever, ethical, moral judgment you want to make on that, the expectation is that they will all look like the people in the company.
Oh, yes.
And you can't, diversity will be rejected because it's not part of their culture. You might not like that, you might not appreciate that, but if you do that, you've had a sociological miss and it won't be accepted.
Yeah. No, that's, I mean, even being aware of that, right? is an important sociological understanding, right?
I did not know that before they told us. I was like, well, what?
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have to explain that a little bit.
Well, and we have bumped into the occasional organization where they say, but we are the employer. And so whoever is working for us is going to fit this mold, do what we want. And we're, again, not saying that's great, but we, that is a good you have to know who you're working with and what those standards are.
Yeah. Well, let's talk, so let's say I'm writing a script for a video or an animation, or maybe I'm creating a longer piece of content for leadership or something like that. What does it look like for me to consider the sociological perspective?
Sure. So I already talked about, like we said, kind of the 101, whether it's imagery, whether it's idioms, again, better examples, better scenarios. I think if we're considering virtual training of any kind, that we are actively looking to bring in experts and guest speakers across the range of the company globally that are positioned as experts. I think that, again, going out of my way to not just, we're a translation company. So, of course, we translate things and make sure that's done appropriately. But what about the voiceover talent for my English?
Right.
Is that a European American, or is that somebody from the whole rest of the global universe?
And which part of the United States? Is it New York, California,
right,
Minnesota,
right,
Texas, right?
Right. And so instead of just defaulting to that, we're thinking about, well, why am I not using a speaker from North Africa who uses English, and so we have the diversity of accents. I think if you are designing, I'd say, a more robust learning experience, something with, like we talked about, time to reflect and all of that we are encouraging open discussion. We're encouraging people to share personal stories about cultural experiences and how those weighed into the situation we're talking. You can't always do that. I get that. But when possible, if you get the opportunity to design a richer experience, that you're including all of those.
And it could be a higher impact, higher profile project where, there's a project that we're working on right now for a global software company. And it's going out to everybody that works in the company. And they're all over the world. And it really, these are deep considerations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to do it right. And you have to, this is maybe aside from creating the experiences, but the more you can do as a learning and development professional to get in touch with that. Again, travel isn't always an option, but whether you're actively reaching out to those people in that country, if you get the opportunity to travel or conferences, you're trying to make sure you're constantly learning.
Or you're reading the newspapers, watch movies that came out of that particular culture. There's a whole bunch to learn. Well, Miriam, as always, I didn't even get all the way through my questions. I always have more questions for you than we have time. But thank you for sharing your thoughts today, and I look forward to our next conversation.
I do too. Thank you so much.
Before we wrap up the show, if you're looking to dive deeper, we've got tons of free downloads, L&D resources, and details about upcoming webinars that you won't want to miss. They're found in the episode description. Plus, if you ever want to chat with either one of us, now's your chance. You can find links in the episode description to connect directly with Miriam or me. We're here to answer your questions and to discuss all things learning and development. And speaking of questions, we love hearing from you. Whether it's a question or a comment or a topic you're curious about, or if you just want to join the conversation, drop us a comment on your favorite social media channel. Your input shapes our shows. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. It's the best way to ensure you never miss out on our latest episode. We're excited to continue to transform learning into a measurable success with you. Until next time.